Hi everyone. It's Sunday night, and so this is my usual check-in with you and very brief video on what is coming up in week 7. So I have to say you've been doing absolutely outstanding work in your weekly posts. And I know you've been keeping up with a very heavy reading schedule as well as a heavy writing schedule. And so I'm hoping to give you a little tiny bit of a break this week, and I'll look for some opportunities to do that again in the near future. So there are a couple of stories on our reading list for this week. Poe's Murders in the Rue Morgue, and Melville's Benito Sereno. Both of them are fantastic texts, and in an ideal world, you would have the chance to read both of them. But I think that given how much work you're doing already, it's very reasonable for you to choose to read only one of them. If you're a big fan of Poe, read Murders in the Rue Morgue. And if you're a big fan of Melville, read Benito Sereno. Just a couple of words about the texts to help you make your choice if you haven't made it already. Poe's text is, on the surface, a text about a rather horrific, quite gruesome murder. But it's also a new kind of detective story, and it features a detective, Monsieur Dupin, who will come back in many of Poe's detective stories, and a detective who routinely outsmarts the police. So if some of you are familiar with Conan Doyle and Sherlock Holmes, you might find some resonances there a little bit earlier in Poe. And Dupin, right, Poe's detective, tends to outsmart the police because of the nature of his methods, a method Poe referred to as ratiocination, right, which was really an intellectual method rather than a kind of evidentiary one. And he applies this ratiocination to solving cases. Melville's story, Benito Sereno, is a long and difficult text. To my mind, it's also perhaps one of the most important texts in the 19th century. But it takes quite a bit of unpacking. So if you decide to take the route of the Melville story, you might want to look at the discussion questions ahead of time, or even listen to the lectures a little bit ahead of time to orient yourself to the concerns of the story. Now, both Poe's story and Melville's story, though, involve something else, and that is the question of race. And so we come really to the second part of this class and the second focus. And our focus is shifting now. We're moving from really thinking about dark romanticism and allegory and questions of structure, right? Questions of symbolism, questions of interpretation, although obviously these things don't go away. But we're moving now to think a little bit about the social and racial and political divisions in 19th century American fiction. Or work, just in general, not just fiction and poetry, right? Literature. The conversation that will begin with these texts is, I think, unfortunately, it's still a very relevant conversation. And it's relevant because although we'd like to believe it to be the case, we don't yet live in a post-racial world. The Black Lives Matter movement, right, this movement arising right in the wake of Ferguson, right, in the wake of Baltimore and so many other events and incidents. This speaks very forcefully to the need for us to continue conversations about race in this country. That conversation is an old one, but it's obviously also an ongoing one. And I trust that this class will be a safe and respectful place for that conversation to continue. Melville and Poe were certainly having it. Right? They may have been having it, right? They were obviously having that conversation in a different time and in the years leading up to the Civil War. But I think that we will find what they have to say quite interesting. After this week, we'll be moving into other work by Frederick Douglass and work by Walt Whitman. Frederick Douglass will most certainly be the most explicit text about slavery and about the implications of slavery. And Whitman's, the work that we'll be looking at Whitman's in the coming weeks will have to do with his Civil War poetry, so political divisions, although there will also be questions about race in his poetry. I wish we had a lot more time in the semester to look at a lot more works that investigate some of these political and racial and social divisions. There are many, many, many things that we are obviously leaving out here. But I hope that this will give you an idea of where the conversation is in mid-19th century American literature, and will also give you a way of thinking about the history of particular questions that continue to haunt us today. This last week, I asked you to look over the blogs you've composed so far and choose a couple of them for expansion and revision. Thank you for doing that on top of doing the reading and the reading response. It seems to me that you are on the right track, but please don't hesitate to get in touch with me if you have questions, more specific questions about your individual revisions. I'm hoping and I'm guessing that the final portfolio will showcase your very best work, and I hope it will be something that you want to keep for the future. Take good care this week, and I look forward to your responses.